In a previous illustrated talk, I gave a background to the manner in which I assembled the text for the Fall of Gondolin from a wide variety of writings by Tolkien, extending over the whole course of his creative life. In this talk, I will be looking more specifically at the manner in which I have attempted to clothe that text in music. There is really only one way in which a composer can set out to write a massive score, like the epic scenes from the Silmarillion, lasting some 10 hours in performance spread over 4 days. That is, to organise the music through the use of individual themes, which have a dramatic or symbolic significance, and which will return at intervals throughout the course of the music. The same method, in fact, that Richard Wagner employed in his even more massive Der Ring des Nibelungen. After he had written that work, Wagner asked a friend to prepare an analysis of the themes he had used for the guidance of listeners, and although the result was not devoid of errors, the result was that the various leitmotifs, as they came to be called, were saddled with more or less appropriate names for the purpose of identification. After I had finally completed the score of the Silmarillion, I undertook to complete a similar sort of analysis, which is published on my website, as much for my own satisfaction as for the guidance of others, where I identified some 130 different significant themes and showed where they recurred in the score. Many quite sensible listeners will object that they wish to encounter the music on its own terms, freed of the shackles of any thematic analysis, and of course the epic scenes should stand on their own 2 feet, and I hope will be found effective regardless of any explanations of how the individual strands are conceived or organised. But I think too that listeners may derive an additional pleasure from recognising, for example, that when, in the Fall of Gondolin, Tuor's ship is nearing the shores of the Blessed Realm, and Idril sings the lines, "Where light of earth is ended and begun," the orchestra is playing, for the first time since Fëanor, 6 or more hours earlier, the music of the lament that Elbereth sang over the demise of the 2 trees, and that Fëanor then adopted as the theme of his crusade to Middle-earth. That, in fact, the drama has come full circle back to its original cause. They may then derive further enlightenment from the fact that a distant solitary echo of that same melody returns in my setting of Bilbo's poem, The Lay of Eärendil, at the words, "He saw the mountains silent rise, where twilight lies upon the knees of Valinor." These references were deliberately inserted by myself, not because I was unable to think of something different to write at that point, but in the hope that listeners will gain a sense of recognition, rather like the enjoyment of encountering an old friend. It is for the benefit of those listeners who would like a degree of guidance, without the need, or indeed the desire, to plunge into the welter of 130 themes, that this briefer description is intended. Although the 4 works which make up the Silmarillion were not written in the order of performance, I had already determined at an early stage how they were to reflect the world of Tolkien's mythology. In the first place, in every sense of the word, came the Valar, the angelic beings who assisted in the creation of the universe and then entered into it to guide its evolution. These primal entities are vocally identified by the most primal of musical devices. They sing on one solidly unvarying note. At least, Manwë the Elder King does, in his relatively brief utterances in Fëanor, and although, for the sake of musical variety, the other Valar depart from this austere practice, they will often adopt the same basic principle, as for example does Ulmo when giving his instructions to Turgon in the prologue to the Fall of Gondolin. Set directly in opposite to the elder king is his coeval Melkor, identified under the name of Morgoth as the enemy of the free peoples of Middle-earth. Morgoth clearly wishes to be regarded as Manwë's equal, indeed his superior, and also, therefore, spends much of his musical energies in the Silmarillion declaiming on one note. But this one note is continually corrupted by a drift of the note a semitone above or a semitone below, frequently with both occurring at the same time. His vassal, Sauron, in Beren and Luthien, takes Morgoth's semitones and crawls about from one to another, rarely settling for any length of time on one note, but in a continual uneasy motion. So does Glaurung in The Children of Húrin, who in places commandeers Morgoth's semitones as a theme of his own. The Balrog, who appears at the end of the Fall of Gondolin, and also at the end of Fëanor, takes those same semitones and stretches them out over a series of plunging octaves. While the orcs, the corrupted progeny of the elves, combine Morgoth's semitones with the more open harmonies of the elves to produce a cocktail of diminished sevenths, and Ungoliant in Fëanor, as well as their own progeny in Beren and Luthien, take the dissolution of conventional harmony to its ultimate degree by combining these chains of diminished sevenths to produce a thematic line without any harmonic basis at all. Richard Strauss adopted a similar technique in his Also sprach Zarathustra as a description of science. Sauron squeezes this chain still tighter in the theme depicting his enchantments, heard in Beren and Luthien, which culminates in a discordant semitonal clash at its climax. In my sketches for The Lord of the Rings, this became the motif for the ring itself. The Valar themselves have a whole raft of personal themes, which mainly underpin their utterances in the orchestra. Ulmo, as we heard just now, has a series of descending chords in A minor, which also depict the sea, and which generate in their turn a theme associated with the elven ships. The Elder King has a rising and descending theme, which launches the very opening of Fëanor and returns as a whisper in the very closing bars of the Fall of Gondolin. In Fëanor, this is succeeded immediately by the principal theme associated with the Valar, and this returns time and time again during the cycle. It is firmly fixed in a series of diatonic chords, but it changes key erratically as the focus shifts from one entity to another. In the Fall of Gondolin, it is perhaps heard most memorably as Voronwë describes his distant vision of the Blessed Realm. There are a great many other themes associated with the individual Valar and their various attributes, but perhaps one deserves special mention. That is originally the motif of the nature spirit Yavanna, which is originally heard in the prelude to Fëanor, but then is transformed into the theme of the two trees which give light to Valinor, the work of her creation. It returns many times during the course of the Silmarillion, not just to represent the two trees themselves, but their symbolic meaning. And in the next example, from the epilogue to the Fall of Gondolin, the theme in the high violins launches the long-delayed reference to Elbereth's lament, to which I referred earlier. The elves, as the firstborn children of the One, adopt many of the same harmonic devices as the Vala themselves. A steadfast insistence on standard diatonic harmonies, and an adoption of stepwise motion in their melodic construction. Again, these themes go back to the earliest pages of Fëanor, and one long-limbed melody, which later becomes attached to the elven kingdom of Doriath, it occurs many times in both Beren and the Children of Húrin, makes a final appearance in the prologue to Gondolin. But the two main themes for the elves in Gondolin are those associated with the hidden city itself. One is an antique-sounding melody with a decidedly modal cast, which occurs a number of times in the first triptych, at one point in a version with medieval echoes in the use of recorders and timpani, and then later as a sort of march to the scaffold as Eöl is led away to execution. In the second triptych, it becomes the theme depicting Tuor's assumption of the armour left for him by Turgon, a deliberate link to the past, which achieves a sort of apotheosis when he reveals this to the startled guards at the hidden gate.
Lord of fountains, hinder not the messenger of the Lord of waters.
The other Gondolin theme appears as the hidden city is described in Scene 1, and it too rises to a massive statement, only to subside into a more restrained tone as the chorus describes the fountains of the city. The only representative in the Fall of Gondolin of the race of men, the second children of the One, is Tuor, son of Huor, a descendant of the tragic house of Hador, whose fate constitutes the tale of the Children of Húrin, the third part of the epic scenes in the Silmarillion. Tuor has his own theme, a brief tag of 3 notes, which is heard at the very outset of the score, but is then developed into a series of tolling bells and a more expanded melody for his marriage with Idril. But Tuor also takes over two themes from earlier segments of the Silmarillion. One of these is a long-limbed melody describing the nature of men, which first appeared in Feanor. This is typical of the human themes in the score, taking the elven style and elaborating it with more chromatic treatment and a shifting harmonic basis. Tuor sings this at full length in his duet with Idril, and she, in a sense of unity, then joins with him in duet. And there is a second theme which Tuor adopts, this time that for the House of Hardor, which is first heard in the Children of Hurin. This is heard in the woodwind at the very outset of the description of Tuor's birth, during the orchestral prelude which precedes the entry of the narrative chorus. Again, this theme returns many times as Tuor declares his ancestry, and in the due course of Tolkien's historical events, it will eventually become the principal theme for Numenor in my symphonic poem Akalabeth, which was released on CD in 2017. There are many other distinctive melodies to be found in the score of Gondolin, which act as a central anchor for individual scenes. For example, the two themes which open the Horns of Ulmo, Tuor's narration to Voronwë of his encounter with the Vala, or Voronwë's own narrative of his travails in the sea on his forlorn quest for the Blessed Realm. The melodic phrase with which Tuor launches the final epilogue returns, sung by the full chorus, towards the end of that scene. But the final section refers back to Voronwë's description of the Great Sea, now reduced to a still calm as Idril looks out after the departing ship. In this final sequence, we hear first of all a brief, wistful reference to one of the human themes on the oboe, followed by that Great Sea theme, and then, after a final citation of the theme of the two trees from the distant semi-chorus, the House of Hardor, the sea again, all of this over a funereally beating drum, before the whispered reference to the elder king to which I referred earlier. That theme, which had launched Feanor some 10 hours earlier, really does bring the cycle of epic scenes full circle.